bring up. Do you think that's something we should bring up? I think that is definitely something we should be bringing up.
I don't think so, because basically let's keep the focus on prosecution and criminal justice sector in terms of female victims, because lawyers, so, but I mean, we'll see how. I think it's streaming live on Facebook now. Can you check?
Just give me a moment to check.
Yes, I think we are live.
Yes, we are. Nida, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So a very warm welcome to all of those people joining in on our fourth Women in Law talks. Today we're going to be focusing on the women in the prosecution sector, and obviously we're going to be linking it back to the study that our co-author here, Nida, has put out recently. For any of you that would have questions on the talk as well, we would really appreciate it if you could put them down in the comment section below. Having said that, Nida, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Aliza, for doing this again and for taking the time to host us. It's a pleasure. I know this is our last session, so I'm a bit nostalgic as well, but hopefully we'll be back with another series of lawyers such as yourself.
Thank you so much for that, Nida. I think that's super kind of you, especially coming from you. But how important do you think this discussion is? Because I think this is one discussion that is often left out from, especially the fair representation point of view. And coming back to what we're going to be talking about in terms of the study's findings, what do you have to say overall about the study and what it has found when it comes to talking about fair representation in terms of prosecution?
Okay, so prosecution was the sector of which people से मतलब जो हमारे respondents थे, they had the least information about this sector. So that was very surprising for me कि ये एक ऐसा sector है जो बहुत ज़्यादा important है, given its close connection with the number of cases of violence that we see in the society, and how this is the main department that is supposed to prosecute all those criminal cases, right? And उस हवाले से अगर हम जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस के ऊपर फोकस करें तो वो भी हमारे सामने डेटा है पंजाब कमिश्नर स्टेटस ऑफ वुमेन की रिपोर्ट का, और भी जो दीगर मतलब इदारे हैं वो भी अपनी रिपोर्ट्स एनुअली भी शाया करते हैं. पुलिस के पास भी अपने स्टेटिस्टिक्स हैं जो हम आगे जाके थोड़ा डिस्कस भी करेंगे ज्यादा डिटेल में. तो मैं वही देख रही थी कि इतनी ज्यादा किस्म का क्राइम होता है, यानी सिर्फ वो क्राइम नहीं है जो चोरी डकैती डाके एंड ऑल दैट, दिस जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस की पूरी स्पेशलाइज्ड फील्ड आपके सामने है जिसके अंदर इतने टाइप के केसेस हैं जो जेंडर से ओरिजिनेट कर रहे हैं. स्पेशलाइज्ड फील्ड, इट्स अ स्पेशलाइज्ड कंसर्न व्हिच आई फील के जिस तरह बाकी सारे स्ट्रक्चर्स एक पेट्रियार्कल पिक्चर पेंट करते हैं उसी तरीके से हमें प्रोसिक्यूशन सेक्टर के अंदर भी वो चीज नजर आती है कि वो उस तरह से रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो रहा कि ये जो सेंसिटिविटीज और कंसर्न्स है ये हमारी जो मेन बॉडी है विच लुक्स आफ्टर दीज क्रिमिनल केसेस, तो वहां पे आपको वो कोई जेंडर बैलेंस उस तरीके का नजर आए. बहरहाल आगे जाके हम इसको मजीद डिस्कस करेंगे, बट एज फार एज योर जो ओवरव्यू है वो यही था कि प्रोसिक्यूशन सबसे ज्यादा लीस्ट अंडरस्टूड सेक्टर था. ज्यादातर लोगों को इसके बारे में इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं थी और ये भी नहीं पता था कि वो इंफॉर्मेशन एक्सेस करनी कैसे है. सो लाइक जुडिशरी के बारे में ज़ाहिर पता था, बार काउंसिल्स के बारे में फिर भी पता था, लॉ फर्म्स के बारे में आई थिंक सबसे ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस था लोगों का क्योंकि वो उनसे खुद भी डील करते रहे, यानी चाहे वो स्टूडेंट है, चाहे वो फीमेल लॉयर्स हैं, चाहे वो हमारे लीगल कम्युनिटी से लोग हैं. आई थिंक सबसे ज्यादा एंगेजमेंट लॉ फर्म्स लेवल के ऊपर या बार एसोसिएशंस, बार काउंसिल्स के लेवल के ऊपर रहता है. तो दैट वाज समथिंग जिसके बारे में फिर भी इंफॉर्मेशन थी लोगों को, या इश्यूज का पता था, चैलेंजेस का पता था. बट प्रोसिक्यूशन remains a category in which there was not enough information. So hopefully हम आज कोशिश करेंगे कि हम वो सारी information जितनी एटलीस्ट हम डिस्कस कर सकते हैं वो करें.
Nida, do you think that a lot of the studies findings that you have found is also because of the fact that the prosecution is one of those taboo sectors not a lot of people want to talk about, not people know, or is also one of those sectors that not a lot of people are often encouraged to explore, especially women? Do you really think
Yes.
that's true?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. This is true because prosecution, देखें लॉ के अंदर ना जनरली स्टूडेंट लेवल से मैंने जो ऑब्जर्व किया है खुद भी, और जो हमारी फाइंडिंग्स भी हमें बताती हैं और जितने लोगों से हमने बात की है, वो यही है कि समवेयर एक डी फैक्टो बेसिस के ऊपर ना डिविजनिंग है कि ये हार्ड एरियाज है तो ये ज्यादा सूटेड है टू मैन, और ये सॉफ्टवेयर एरियाज है तो ये जैसे फैमिली लॉ हो गया या इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स है और इस तरह की चीजें हैं. तो मतलब उस तरह से अनस्पोकन किस्म की ना एक डिविजनिंग हुई है which is coming from again stereotypical notions about gender, right? So उसकी कोई evidence backed research नहीं है. इनफैक्ट हमारी तो कुछ ऐसी फाइंडिंग्स भी थी जो उस चीज को डिस्पेल करती हैं, उन मिथ्स को कैंसिल आउट करती हैं, वो भी हम डिस्कस करेंगे. सो definitely like those angles of discouragement and discrimination and the fact that this is a field that is considered hard in terms of gender placement, तो इसलिए women are not as encouraged. एंड किस लेयर के ऊपर क्या इश्यूज हैं वो भी बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है. बिकॉज देखें जहां पे बात आती है ना अपॉइंटमेंट्स की जो कि किसी एक इंस्टीट्यूशन के हाथ में होते हैं और उनकी डिस्क्रेशन पे होते हैं, वहां तो फिर भी हम कह सकते हैं कि अच्छा डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हो गई या फिर जेंडर लेंस मिसिंग एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट. बट इंटरेस्टिंग चीज प्रोसिक्यूशन के बारे में वो ये कि ये एग्जाम्स पे बेस्ड होती है इनिशियल रिक्रूटमेंट्स आपकी. एंड एग्जाम्स के अंदर क्लियर जब आप करते हो तो उसके बाद आपका इंटरव्यू होता है, इंटरव्यू स्टेज के बाद जाके फिर आपकी कई अपॉइंटमेंट्स होती हैं ऑल दैट. सो वो बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग था कि दीज पोस्ट आर एक्चुअली एडवर्टाइज, द स्टेट द गवर्नमेंट जो पंजाब की है सपोज टू एडवर्टाइज दीज पोस्ट, एंड ये एग्जाम बेस्ड थिंग है. तो जनरली एग्जाम बेस्ड चीजें में लड़कियां ज्यादा आगे भी आती हैं, जैसे हमने जुडिशरी में देखा, और वो एक्सेल भी करती हैं. लेकिन प्रोसिक्यूशन में क्या वजह है कि डिस्पाइट इट बीइंग अ competitive process you still don't see as many females coming forward. So then we had to engage with all those other factors कि अच्छा फिर अगर एग्जाम्स बेस्ड मॉडल भी है तो उसके बावजूद फिर ऐसे क्या फैक्टर्स हैं कि उस तरह से खवातीन आगे नहीं आ रही. एंड सबसे बड़ा जो दो फैक्टर्स थे वो ये थे कि डर्थ ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन है, एक्सेसिबल इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं है, एंड सेकेंडली जो डिस्करेजमेंट आपने रेज किया. तो ये दो मेन फैक्टर्स थे उसके, बट और भी हैं विच वी विल कम टू इन सम टाइम. इफ यू हैव एनी क्वेश्चंस अबाउट द डेटा, बिकॉज ये एक ऐसा ग्राफिक है जो हम अपने ऑलमोस्ट हर सीरीज में डिस्कस करते हैं, because this gives us the state of representation, gives us a picture of where we stand. So if you have any questions about this, we can talk.
No, absolutely I do. Firstly, I think that it is truly remarkable to have it all in one page, and the figures are just screaming at you when you look at them, so to speak. But I think सबसे important बात यहाँ पर ये है कि जो आपने बहुत important बात highlight की कि लोगों को अक्सर नहीं पता होता where they're supposed to go or who they're supposed to look at when it comes to especially female prosecutors, जो इतनी ज़्यादा हमारे जो profession में है वो नहीं है. And it's not just a provincial thing, it's a Pakistani thing. Okay, overall you have a very less proportion of female prosecutors, and we have an idea as to what those barriers or what those obstacles could be, and I'm sure you're going to touch upon them as well. But very briefly, if you could tell me a little bit about the JCP and also about the higher courted and subordinate judges and what this figure represents, that would be great.
Yeah, so since it's the last session, and to wrap it up, I think एक दफा दोबारा इन फिगर्स को रिविजिट करना जरूरी है. जैसे मैं हमेशा कहती हूँ कि ये फिगर्स हमारे पास आए थे जो हमने इस स्टडी से पहले एक स्टडी कंडक्ट की थी ऑफिशियली फेडरल मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ लॉ एंड जस्टिस के साथ मिलकर. तो ये सारे डेटा जो है जो आपको लाइट पिंक में नजर आ रहा है, ये सारा ऑफिशियली कंपाइल्ड डेटा है through the good offices of the federal ministry, and they wrote to the prosecution department, for example, and to the registrar of different courts and everything to get these numbers and data for us, and then we obviously sat and analyzed it. तो उस हवाले से ये पहली दफा एक ऑफिशियल कंपाइलेशन हमारे पास है जो ऑथेंटिक है और जो ऑफिशियल सोर्सेज से कंपाइल किया गया है, जिसमें आप पिक्चर देखें कि मोर और लेस आपके पास 15% से ज्यादा रिप्रेजेंटेशन सेक्टर्स के अंदर, यानी जहां पे बेस्ट रिप्रेजेंटेशन है वो अप टू 15% जा रहा है, which is still less than what is you know advocated generally. और जनरल एडवोकेट होता है कि कम से कम 33% यानी 1/3 रिप्रेजेंटेशन होनी चाहिए. हम लोग ऑब्वियसली उससे एक स्टेप आगे जाके डिमांड कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, सिर्फ रिप्रेजेंटेशन काफी नहीं है, फेयर रिप्रेजेंटेशन होनी चाहिए. फेयर रिप्रेजेंटेशन इंटेल्स की कम से कम 50% तक रिप्रेजेंटेशन जो है वो इंश्योर होनी चाहिए, डिपेंडिंग ऑन with reference to the proportionality of population. We've calculated those figures. So you can see subordinate judges हाईएस्ट उसके अंदर हमारे वो एग्जाम बेस्ड प्रोसेस है, 15% है. हाई कोर्ट जजेस में आपके पास तकरीबन 5%, मोर और लेस, डिपेंडिंग ऑन कोई कंफर्म होता है, कोई नहीं होता. फिर उसके बाद अब जैसे जस्टिस आयशा मलिक को अपॉइंट कर दिया गया सुप्रीम कोर्ट में, तो उसके बाद वहां से भी एक फीमेल जज कम होगी लाहौर हाई कोर्ट से. सो ये नंबर प्लस माइनस होता रहता है, बट एसेंशली मोर लेस 5% representation of women in the high court. but आप सुप्रीम कोर्ट में देखें तो जस्टिस आयशा की वजह से सिर्फ 2% जो है रिप्रेजेंटेशन है. ये आज से कुछ अर्सा पहले तक 0% हुआ करती थी. फिर बार काउंसिल
I think what's more interesting is the JCP and how there's continuously no representation.
that's very interesting. अच्छा, मैं एक और भी बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग आपको फिगर बताना चाह रही हूँ कि ये जो कुछ फिगर्स है ना, ये इसमें एक चीज क्लियर नहीं होती. अगर आप ओवरऑल पाकिस्तान में देखें तो ओवरऑल पाकिस्तान में जजेस वैसे तो 15% है, लाइक इंक्लूडिंग ऑल टीयर्स, ठीक है. लेकिन जो फीमेल जजेस 15% है, उसके अंदर अगर आप सिर्फ फीमेल्स का इंटर से ब्रेक डाउन करें तो उसमें फिर ये जो 5% आपको हाई कोर्ट का भी नजर आ रहा है और आपको लगता है कि अच्छा चलो 5% तो है, तो ये नंबर कम होके मजीद 1% पे रह जाता है. सो ये जो ओवरऑल हमारे पास नंबर है ऑफ फीमेल रिप्रेजेंटेशन इन जुडिशरी, वो एक्चुअली इंटर से विद इन विमेन अगर हम सिर्फ कैलकुलेट करें तो दैट्स इवन लेस, एंड दैट्स definitely a cause of concern. But coming back to, of course, prosecutors and GCP, Judicial Commission of Pakistan, of course, responsible for appointing judges to the higher courts. उसमें हमारे पास फिलहाल कोई एक भी representation नहीं है, and therefore it's 0. And most interesting thing for today, given that our topic is prosecutors, तो हम उस पर बात करते हैं कि वहां पे भी हमारा सबऑर्डिनेट जुडिशरी की तरह का ही सिचुएशन है कि आपके पास up to 15% representation है. एक जो सिमिलैरिटी बड़ी स्ट्राइकिंग हुई है कि सबऑर्डिनेट जजेस भी कंपेटिटिव एग्जामिनेशन के थ्रू रिक्रूट होते हैं और प्रोसिक्यूटर्स भी, और दोनों ही में women are at 15%. So this is a correlation which is very interesting for me. I don't know whether it is for you or not, but क्या एग्जाम्स का कोई ऐसा लिंक है कि चलो उससे कदरे ज्यादा रिप्रेजेंटेशन तो है, लेकिन एक तरह का कैप हमें नजर आ रहा है कि 15% पे आके वो रिप्रेजेंटेशन रुक गई है डिस्पाइट कंपेटिटिव एग्जामिनेशंस. तो ये क्या वजह है और इसके क्या फैक्टर्स है? सो दिस वाज द इंटरेस्टिंग फिनोमेना फॉर अस to consider, but ये वो अब research points हैं जो इससे निकले, and we still have to kind of look at them in more detail to see कि correlation कोई है कि नहीं, या क्या exams के process के through भी कोई cap लग सकता है despite it being a competitive process. So that's hopefully something that we will do in a year's time. When we meet again, we might have more information on that.
No, I think absolutely. I think that every single sort of figure deserves its own sort of booklet or its own sort of research or its own sort of campaign of sorts. के यहाँ पर ज़्यादा चाहिए females, because I think the female representation, especially in the JCP, speaks a lot, and especially in all of these different sorts of adare jahan par you need to have that sort of insight, especially when you talk about the prosecution where gender sensitivity is so important. But coming back to the point at hand, and I think you mentioned some really, really important things when it comes to fair representation, and obviously we'll be coming back to that after you proceed with your slide. So what can you tell us about the governing law when it comes to the prosecution service of Pakistan?
क्योंकि इंफॉर्मेशन का थोड़ा डेप्थ था, सो वी थॉट चलो हम इसको भी कवर कर लेते हैं. एसेंशली 2006 में एक लॉ पास हुआ था जिसके अंदर प्रोसिक्यूशन का जो डिपार्टमेंट था वो पूरा रिवाइटलाइज किया गया था, एंड नाउ दिस इज द गवर्निंग लॉ, इट्स कॉल्ड द पंजाब क्रिमिनल प्रोसिक्यूशन सर्विस Constitution, Functions and Powers Act 2006. And as per this act, Section 2L of the act defines what a prosecutor means, and it includes all these different tiers of prosecution. So उसमें आपका prosecutor general भी है, your additional prosecutor general, deputy prosecutor general, district public prosecutor, deputy district public prosecutor. So basically whatever name you are, whatever tier you are serving, prosecutor is covered in that definition. But the interesting thing is that there is a difference in the way the prosecutor general is appointed, which is the topmost person in the organization or in this sector in the department. So your prosecutor general is appointed in accordance with Section 6 of this act. And like Section 6 के तहत अगर आप उसको स्टडी करें तो बेसिकली ये एक पॉलिटिकल अपॉइंटमेंट होती है, एंड इट इज द डिस्क्रेशन ऑफ द प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट टू अपॉइंट हुएवर मीट्स द क्वालिफिकेशंस जो आगे फिर सेक्शन 7 में उन्होंने दी है. तो ये कोई कंपेटिटिव एग्जाम की बेसिस पे नहीं अपॉइंट होते, और इनके लिए कोई ऐसी गवर्नमेंट की स्टेटेड कमिटमेंट टू डाइवर्सिटी एंड इंक्लूजन भी नहीं है. तो वो ये देखते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट के केसेस में कौन बंदा सबसे बेहतर तरीके से रिप्रेजेंट कर सकेगा, या गवर्नमेंट के एंगल से, या it's more वो एग्जीक्यूटिव के साथ sort of inherently politically linked है, and इसलिए जब तक वो उस लेवल के ऊपर विमेन्स या जेंडर लेंस या डाइवर्सिटी और इंक्लूजन का लेंस मैटर नहीं करेगा, वी फील के प्रोसिक्यूटर जनरल लेवल के ऊपर तक वो चीज ट्रिकल डाउन नहीं करेगी, बिकॉज इट वोंट फैक्टर इन एज अ कंसिडरेशन.
About how the prosecutor general is appointed, I think that speaks a lot about how, and I'm just assuming straight off the bat that there are not a lot of women that are appointed on this rank where they are given this title because of that very reason. How do we feel about that? How do we feel about this being a political appointment as opposed to it being one? Because this is a very important role. I think both of us can agree to that.
Yeah, it is, and I think इसका वही है कि जाहिर है ये गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर it's in the statute और statute ये, क्योंकि देखिए जो प्रोसिक्यूटर का रोल है उसने रिप्रेजेंट करना स्टेट की तरफ से, उसमें क्राइम्स की जैसे मैंने बात की कि सिर्फ जेंडर बेस्ड क्राइम तो नहीं है ना. ऑफ कोर्स इट्स फॉर अस and for a lot of people it's a huge consideration, but because crime is of various types and dimensions and not necessarily always linked to a certain gender, that's why I think कि वो focus क्योंकि gender के ऊपर नहीं आता, therefore it's an appointment, politically affiliated appointment उस तरह से, and so अपने बंदे सारे essentially लगाते हैं जिस तरह दूसरी सर्विसेज में होता है. सो ये एक इसका एक फैक्टर है जो जेंडर लेंस से जब हम देखते हैं तो ऑफ कोर्स हमारे लिए वो एक होता है कि अच्छा फिर हाउ विल विमेन एवर गेट अपॉइंटेड टू सच पोजीशंस, बिकॉज वो फैक्टर इन नहीं हो रहे चीजें उस लेवल के ऊपर, अनलेस if your chief minister ends up being a woman someday, maybe then, I don't know. But these are of course questions that, like I said, we need more engagement with these questions, and we need to conduct more analysis and deeper studies. But अगर आप सिर्फ उस political appointment को ना देखें और अगर आप आगे section 7 पे जाएं तो वो भी बहुत interesting और fascinating है, क्योंकि जैसे है ना layers and layers of gatekeeping जिसे कहते हैं, या layers and layers of जिसे कहते हैं criterias हैं जिससे बंदियों की representation पे impact आ सकता है, कोई एक चीज तो है नहीं. So आप qualifications पे देख लेंगे.
Just for clarification, these are fresh appointments, right? These are not elevations, or they are not people who have already existed in the prosecution sector. These could be people
नहीं जरूरी नहीं है, मतलब somebody who's already serving as a somebody, for example, who's already serving as a deputy prosecutor or an additional prosecutor or whatever, aap usko bhi, so this is totally the discretion of the CM essentially, or the provincial government. So it really is not there's no structure, what I'm trying to say, other than section 7 जो है. अब section 7 क्या कहता है कि you have to be a citizen of Pakistan, you can't be less than 45 years of age. Then उसके बाद ये A, B, C, D और E, ये 5 ऑप्शंस हैं. इस तरह का कोई भी बंदा जो है प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट उसको लगा सकती है. सो आपने अगर नॉट लेस देन 10 years अगर आप एडवोकेट हाई कोर्ट रह चुके हैं तो तब भी आप कंसिडर हो सकते हैं इस अपॉइंटमेंट के लिए. you have to be a law graduate, और आपका for not less than 17 years you should be a member of a prescribed civil service. अगर इस तरह का आपका कोई है, if you meet this, तो आप तो ये आप देखेंगे एंड में वर्ड और है. सो इट्स नॉट लाइक कि आपने ये 5 कंडीशंस मीट करनी है, जैसे आप एक भी कैटेगरी में फॉल करेंगे तो आप टेक्निकली एलिजिबल होंगे टू बी अपॉइंटेड. लेकिन अपॉइंटमेंट या नोटिफिकेशन किसके नाम का होगा, ये प्रोगेटिव है, ये पावर है ऑफ द प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट, एसेंशियली द सीएम एंड हिज कैबिनेट एंड एवरीथिंग. तो ये वो डिसाइड करते हैं. सो ये इस तरीके से ये चीज ऑपरेट करती है. सो आप देखें, द टॉप मोस्ट पर्सन being a political appointment with all these criterias is obviously, matlab, we can see how difficult it would be for a woman to be in this position. But the important thing is, and the interesting thing is, कि जो बाकी appointments है, यानी हमने देखा कि एक prosecutor general तो ऊपर है ही है, but उसके अलावा इतनी और सब categories हैं, additional prosecutor, deputy, district, XYZ, ठीक है. सो ऑल ऑफ दोज डिफरेंट अपॉइंटमेंट्स, अब वो कैसे होती है, उसका तरीका जो है वो हमें सेक्शन 8 में दिया हुआ है. और उसके नीचे एसेंशली यही है कि अगेन गवर्नमेंट ही अपॉइंट करती है, लेकिन ओवर एंड ऑफ कोर्स जैसे डिस्ट्रिक्ट है तो उसमें हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट का एक पब्लिक प्रोसिक्यूटर होना जरूरी है. एंड इंटरेस्टिंग चीज इसमें यही आ जाती है कि ये वाली जो बाकी की अपॉइंटमेंट्स हैं, ये फिर एग्जाम्स और इंटरव्यू वाला जो प्रोसेस है, जो कि आपका पंजाब पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन के थ्रू सारा मैनेज होता है, उनकी रिकमेंडेशन के ऊपर जो इनिशियल रिक्रूटमेंट्स होती हैं वो होती हैं, और फिर आगे प्रमोशन या ट्रांसफर के जरिए कई जगह पे सीटें फिल की जाती हैं, डिपेंडिंग ऑन कि कहाँ पे किस जगह पे किस टीयर की वैकेंसी जो है वो मौजूद है. सो दिस प्रोसेस इज प्रीटी मच स्ट्रीमलाइंड. बट यहाँ पे भी जो एडवर्टीजमेंट्स आती हैं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल पोस्ट आपकी एडवर्टाइज हो रही हैं, उसके अंदर भी there is a quota interestingly for minorities and differently abled, but there is no quota for women. And I'm not saying कि quota के ऊपर लोगों की अपनी opinions हो सकती है, but all I'm saying is that gender lens is missing. So you can have quota for minorities or religious communities, or you can have quota for differently abled persons.
But I think also because there is no quota, there are women missing out. Then there is going to be a place where you're going to have to say कि यहाँ पर तो औरतें हैं नहीं, because we've talked about this I think previously as well in our talks के we aren't blind supporters of the quota system. We just think that fair representation at some time of affirmative action is necessary in certain places to ensure a certain gender lens. And I think when you're competing with men in a culture like this, you're automatically bound to lose out. That is something that we've seen time and time again. It's not something on the basis of merit. It's more of on the basis of perhaps preference or some other sort of prejudice that
the network, the fact that women won't be able to benefit, extend as much benefit. So of course there are other vested interest and factors, and I agree with you. But ये जो competitive exam है, इसकी basis पे भी देखें, हमें लगता है कि ये structured है, लेकिन मैं जो चीज highlight करना चाह रही हूँ ये कि आप देखें interview stage के ऊपर काफी सारी discretion है. So आप अगर एग्जाम क्लियर करके भी आ गई हैं, तो आगे जब आपका इंटरव्यू होना है, वो प्रोसिक्यूटर जनरल ने और कमीशन से कोई बंदा या उन मतलब वो भी सारे आगे बंदे ही हैं ना जो आपका इंटरव्यू भी ले रहे हैं, और उस पे वो आपको किन चीजों पे गेज कर रहे हैं, किन पे नहीं, मतलब दे हैव अ लॉट ऑफ डिस्क्रेशन एट दैट स्टेज एज वेल, व्हिच इज व्हाई अगेन आई फील अफर्मेटिव एक्शन इज सो इम्पोर्टेंट, बिकॉज जब तक ये डिस्क्रेशन डिफरेंट लेवल्स के ऊपर मैनिफेस्टेड रहेगी, तब तक there will be avenues where you can knock women out, because there will be that margin over there. So and I think jab tak
the perfect example, Nida,
institutionalize nahi honge.
I think this is the perfect example jahan par equal in law but not equal in fact wali baat hoti hai, jahan par on paper it may sound like you are and you have protected the vested interests of women and minorities and differently abled, but in actuality practical situations की काफी different इसलिए होती है because what does one expect when you give a lot of discretion to a political appointment? I think that is where people miss out on, they think that just because you have one sort of by statute, you have these exams that you're supposed to be taking. I think in their head that is how they've ensured a fair system, and unfortunately I don't think that is the case.
So I feel that in absence of affirmative action, even the competitive exam doesn't help us much, because at the interview stage there is considerable discretion, and there's not really enough people questioning that, but also of course other factors ऐसे बाकी challenges हैं. मैंने पहला जो बड़ा challenge देखा वो ये notice किया कि जो advertisements हमारे सामने आई, हमने अखबारों से जाके और websites वगैरह से जाके explore की कि advertisements किस तरह से वो दे रहे हैं ना, तो उसी में से हमें पता लगा कि अच्छा ठीक है, so there's no open and publicly declared commitment to ensuring diversity inclusion, और ये this is across the board situation. It is true for law firms, it is true for judiciary, it is true for bar councils, it is true for prosecution. There is just no declared commitment to gender diversity inclusion in any sector, which is
you have also
like
come
really
across
amusing.
I think recently we also came across the JCP statement, and what we heard about the seniority principle very recently from senior judges. I do think that this is something that is, especially diversity and inclusion, is something that is kept at the back end for a very long time. I think that even with the elevation of this discussion, they are not ready to have.
It's neither a factor. Yeah, it's not a factor. It's not a consideration. It's not a priority at all. And like I keep reiterating कि ये सारे इदारे पब्लिक जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के नीचे ऑपरेट करते हैं. आपकी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आपको आर्टिकल 25 और 34 में कहती है कि affirmative actions for full participation of women in national life should be ensured. So this is something that you are constitutionally mandated to do. It's not a favor. It's something that makes perfect sense for the state of Pakistan, for its economy, for its growth. So there is actual business sense there to ensure that women do participate in national life, and that includes the justice sector. You can't keep and minus the justice sector out. You can't keep it out कि जी constitution के ये aspects हम बाकी सब के ऊपर तो लगाएं लेकिन अपने ऊपर ना लगाएं. So ये मुझे कभी भी बात समझ नहीं आती कि क्यों ये प्रिंसिपल्स क्यों नहीं कभी इतने हॉटली एडवोकेट हो रहे होते हमारे बार की तरफ से या दूसरे जो हमारे कॉलीग्स हैं उनकी तरफ से. एंड जैसा मैंने आपको पहले भी हाईलाइट किया, तो वो एडवर्टाइजमेंट्स इतनी इंटरेस्टिंग थी कि उसमें डेफिनेटली कोटा, देखें कोटा पे या तो फिर आपको होना एक प्रिंसिपल डिसएग्रीमेंट है तो फिर आप माइनॉरिटीज और डिफरेंटली एबल्ड का भी ना रखें, और अगर आपने उनका रखा है तो फिर विमेन एज या जेंडर माइनॉरिटीज जो है जिसमें ट्रांसजेंडर भी आ जाते हैं उनको फिर आप मतलब अगर नहीं cater कर रहे as a separate class of persons who are impacted or marginalized and not being accounted for in the system जो कि उनको सबसे ज्यादा impact कर रहा है. Because prosecution तो देखें ना डायरेक्टली आपके gender based crime के साथ भी linked है, जो transgenders के ऊपर violence हो रहा है इतना ज्यादा, वो भी तो एक factor है, तो उनकी representation का भी तो सवाल है. And then of course religious communities.
I'm also always surprised how women fall in the eyes of the people under the ambit of a minority, which we are not, which we time and time again, I always have to come up in any of these discussions, regardless of whatever talk we're having. And I have to remind them that, you're not talking to somebody who's part of the minority. You're talking to somebody who is part of the country, who makes up a lot of the population, I should add. But it is something that, again, is not really talked about. So moving ahead with your study, Nida, what would you like to talk about when it comes to what you have found in terms of fair representation in the prosecution? What were some of the key findings that you came across when you were, sort of curating your study? What were the few things that particularly stood out to you?
I think this slide over here is actually very interesting. I think it adds to the discussion that we were just having about the link between prosecution crime and representation. And it's so important to see this because ये link अक्सर miss हो जाता है even at the law school level, where women are discouraged from pursuing criminal law, for example. अब देखें आपको ये gender parity report जो 2019-20 की is one of the recent most reports जो कि PCSW ने की है. इसमें it shows कि gang rape cases भी increase हुए from 190 to 219, custodial rape cases increase हुए हैं, आपकी मतलब all of these heinous crimes, rape जो है वो of course not just gang rape but rape in general भी हम देखते आएगा दिन बच्चे and everything, necrophilia इतना होता जा रहा है. इसके अलावा आपका sexual assault, harassment, kidnapping, domestic violence, like there's so many categories of gender based violence that are now being accounted and उनके data जो है उसको maintain किया जा रहा है. And yet आप देखें only one woman was appointed as DPP in 2020, whereas in 2018 and 19 अगर आप देखें तो किसी भी खातून को as DPP जो है appoint नहीं किया गया in any of the districts. And that obviously reflects extremely poorly on the gender parity as far as the higher cadres of prosecution service are concerned in the district, at the district level. ठीक है? इसी तरह आपके honor crimes भी increase होते रहे हैं आपको. So with such high numbers of victims and survivors being women, and of course transgenders and all, and then it's not just these women who are victims or survivors, they're also women who are in conflict with the law, right? So they're like 734 women incarcerated in Punjab, and highest number of those women who are jailed, they are in Rawalpindi, then Central Jail Lahore and all of that. And you know, despite so many women being impacted by the criminal justice process, or being victims or survivors of gender-based violence, or being in jails and everything, the representation के सिर्फ 15% prosecutors female है पूरे मुल्क में आपके, so that is obviously not sufficient, and it raises a very big question mark कि ये, I mean, it is definitely astonishing for me also अभी तक as a female lawyer that they continue to be discouraged from practicing criminal law in Pakistan. So I mean, I find that disconnect very amusing also, but very alarming as well at the same time कि इतना evidence है आपके पास, and उसके बावजूद आप encourage नहीं कर रहे और ख़वातीन को कि वो criminal law की तरफ आए. So that's something that we need to all think about. And I think that the main reason for that is because there's a perception problem. And also to gatekeep specific fields, जैसे हमने पहले बात की, वो gender एक lens से दिखते हैं, stereotypical roles के साथ associate करते हैं, family laws की तरफ encourage कर देंगे, IP की तरफ भेजेंगे. But one of our respondents, she lamented this perception कि जी ये तो criminal law जैसे बंदियों के लिए ठीक नहीं and all that. And she said that it's unfortunate given that women have been made to internalize these things themselves, and invariably आप देखेंगे family matters के अंदर भी तो there is some element of gender based violence and crime which is also present,
I was actually
right?
going to come on to that. I think usually जब ऐसा होता है, it's never a straight up case of just divorce. Hardly ever is it just like that. I think as female lawyers, we know that वहाँ पर जो especially जो cases आते, there is always an element of, unfortunately, domestic abuse or violence that somebody has come across. And I think what's more interesting is the fact that is the fact that women are so affected by crimes on an everyday basis, so much to the point where you don't have people in key positions that are women that can include this sort of lens of gender sensitivity, which is so very, very much important to talk about. But very interestingly, if I could very quickly mention a divorce case that we came across 2 months ago. It was a divorce case, and it was being termed as a divorce family case, but it turned out, unfortunately, to be more of a gender-based violence case. And that too because our senior partner, who was a male by default, as they all are, was kept on referring to it as a family matter or a family case. And then I looked at the file and I said, this is not just about a divorce. This is about somebody who has time and time again been abused at the hands of her husband. Let's just stop calling it or putting it under just the umbrella of family, which again, there's no problem when it comes to that, but there's so many different crimes that have this GBV element, and they're ignored and काफी ज़्यादा overlooked, which they shouldn't be. And I think that जहाँ तक बात आती है internalized,
उसका भी एक interesting reason है. हाँ, उसका भी एक interesting factor है जो बहुत important है. अगर आप notice करें कि जो हमारा Prevention of Violence Against Women Act है, वो अभी notified ही नहीं है मुल्तान के अलावा किसी और district. So in absence of a law on ground that can actually accommodate that kind of a case, you just have the family law option, and so that's the best route to have. And अगर आप उसको फिर family case नहीं बनाएंगे तो फिर आप और किधर लेके जाएंगे ना, in the sense कि बाकी avenues ठीक है, हाँ, there is Pakistan Penal Code and there is all of that कि आप hurt में ले जाए, उसमें ले जाए, उसमें, but वो जो एक special law पूरा बनाया है for the protection of women and violence against them, यानी जो actual law deal करता है उनके सेफ्टी के साथ, उनके शेल्टर अरेंजमेंट्स, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लेवल के ऊपर, व्हाटएवर, एक सपोर्टिव जो इनेबलिंग लॉ बना है, वो ऑन ग्राउंड अभी एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करता है अदर देन इन मुल्तान. सो जब तक वो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर्स नहीं एग्जिस्ट करेंगे ऑन ग्राउंड, वो लॉ नोटिफाई नहीं होगा. सो इट्स ये मैंने भी बहुत दफा देखा है कि इस तरीके से होता है, बट उसमें समवेयर एक ये मजबूरी भी आ जाती है कि अगर फिर आप उसे फैमिली लॉ मैटर नहीं बनाए, तो how else do you get the woman to safety, because there is the actual law is not in force, so you have to resort to the next best available framework, and that is obviously not suited to cater to cases like violence and everything, because that's a family court और उसकी jurisdiction और है, उसके questions वहाँ पे और है, framing of issues और है. So it's just a case of substituting the actual law जो नहीं है and trying to fit in it in the framework of family law cases. And then of course the kind of remedies you will get from that framework will not be the ones that actually support your needs. I hope you get what I'm trying to say here.
No,
but
absolutely.
ये एक dilemma हमने time and again experience किया कि laws के ना होने की वजह से on ground वो systems ना होने की वजह से ये एक route adopt करना पड़ता है family law वाला. And that is why the denial is also there, but it serves and it suits the purpose, and that is why we see कि इतनी कोई ज़्यादा focus नहीं है of setting up the violence against women वाला जो law है in other districts. So इतनी कोई urgency नहीं है at the top level, and that's a bit and then of course उसके अंदर again political will भी आती है of course कि वो होएगी, funds release होंगे तो फिर वो structures on ground बन सकते हैं and all that. So it is I think we're looking at a long किस्म के
खासतौर पर जब हम बात करते हैं women in criminal law in general, because let's just talk about that. I think कि वहाँ पर there are a lot of sociological reasons as to why things are the way that they are, and that's not just with criminal law and prosecution. I think that's a Pakistani judicial problem, where so many different conversations that need to be happening on ground, they are not happening at this point in time, especially the one on fair representation. But when we talk about criminal law, and the surprising thing in my personal experiences, and then later on I'll ask you what your study, what did you find for your study when it comes to this particular aspect, is that there are a lot of women that are intrigued by criminal law. They are. It's not that there's this dispassionate sort of attitude towards them as many people have perceived. They just think that it is, again, one of those places where they're not welcome, or they feel like they cannot progress as much because of their gender. Do you really think that's something that you have also come across during your study? And what other key findings do you think you have when it comes to women being somewhat discouraged from the criminal profession?
Absolutely. I was going to come to this as well कि जो ये जेंडर जैसे गेट कीपिंग करते हैं स्पेसिफिक फील्ड्स को और कह देते हैं हार्ड है, सॉफ्ट है, इसमें चली जाओ, ये मत करो, ये भी बेस्ड ऑन सर्टेन मिथ्स एंड परसेप्शंस है. इसके पीछे कोई एविडेंस बेस्ड स्टडी तो है नहीं. तो हमने जो थोड़ी बहुत की है, ऑफ कोर्स इट्स नॉट एज एक्सटेंसिव एज वीड लाइक इट टू बी, बट जो एक आपको कर्सरी लुक भी है उससे पता चल जाता है कि देयर आर women led and women owned and women run law firms which are solely looking at family and criminal law matters, और उनके साथ जो associates भी उनकी वो भी सारी की सारी females हैं, and they are doing a fairly good and decent job at this hard field and excelling, and and फिर AGHS का example हमारे सामने है जो कि it's one of the oldest most reputed firms जिसमें again फैमिली मैटर्स भी आते हैं, बट ऑल्सो उनमें अगर कोई क्रिमिनल मैटर्स होते हैं साथ तो वो भी देखते हैं. मोर रिसेंटली मोर फीमेल्स इन लीडरशिप रोल्स हैव कम फॉरवर्ड, अपनी अपनी लॉ फर्म सेट कर रही हैं, एंड दे आर ऑल्सो नॉट लिमिटिंग देमसेल्व्स टू जस्ट कॉर्पोरेट और आईपी एंड इस तरह के काम. उन्होंने भी क्रिमिनल लॉ को बिल्कुल ओपन रखा हुआ है, और उसमें भी अगर आप देखें कि उनकी फर्म्स में भी ज्यादा फीमेल एसोसिएट्स आ रही हैं. सो द फाइंडिंग एसेंशियली इज कि जब आपके पास लीडरशिप लेवल पे या लीडरशिप पोजीशंस पे यू हैव फीमेल लॉयर्स, देन इट डजंट मैटर कि वो कौन से एरिया में कौन से फील्ड में ऑपरेट कर रही हैं, वो चाहे फिर क्रिमिनल लॉ भी हो, उनको फीमेल एसोसिएट्स मिल भी जाती हैं और वो उसमें काम भी करते हैं विदाउट एनी हैंगअप्स और इश्यूज और ये परसेप्शंस. ऑल्टरनेटिवली हमने जो जितनी मेल लेड लॉ फर्म्स देखी उसमें फीमेल एसोसिएट्स की परसेंटेज भी कम थी as compared to the female associates in a women-led law firm. और of course उसमें दायरेकार भी ज़्यादा established थे कि जी ये मतलब मेल ओरिएंटेड मैटर्स हैं ये उस तरह से. तो आई फील दैट ये भी एक वही बात है कि इट्स नॉट ट्रू. अगर आप एविडेंस को देखें, आप ट्रेंड्स को देखें, तो यू विल फाइंड दैट women are, you know, that they're comfortable doing any sort of work in which they are interested or passionate about, and that includes NAB prosecution, that includes ये जो है आपकी क्रिमिनल लॉ हो गया, कुछ भी हो गया. सो आई डोंट थिंक कि ये डिमार्केशंस इनकी कोई फैक्चुअल या एविडेंशियल बेसिस है. परसेप्शन ओरिएंटेड है जरूर, और वो परसेप्शन हमें एविडेंस के साथ ही डिफीट करनी पड़ेंगी. So, and that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to take you to the key findings now, which you asked me. This is data which is coming directly from the study. So we have female law students in the first column, and we have female lawyers in the second column. And so we asked them some basic questions about whether they considered being a prosecutor or not. And out of the students, of course, 64% of them said no, and almost 48% of them who said no, उसका रीजन ये था कि lack of information. So students basically didn't, उनका यही था कि जी information इतनी काफी नहीं है. But यही रीजन जब हम फीमेल लॉयर्स का देखते हैं तो ये 82% हो जाता है. यानी लैक ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन फीमेल लॉयर्स जो कि प्रोफेशन में आ गई हुई हैं उनको ज्यादा मतलब वो फेस करती हैं, which explains why वो जो ब्लॉक कर देते हो आपकी जी ये आपकी फील्ड है, ये आपका एरिया है, आप इसी में रहे, तो वो उसी में सारे काम में लग जाती हैं. ऑल दे डोंट रियली गेट अ चांस टू एक्सप्लोर दैट मच. स्टूडेंट्स के पास वैसे भी ज्यादा एवेन्यूज अब आते जा रहे हैं थ्रू देयर यूनिवर्सिटीज एज वेल, तो उनको फिर भी ज्यादा नॉलेज होती है. बट जो फीमेल लॉयर्स थी वो वाला जो हमारा सैंपल था वो ऑलरेडी अपनी फील्ड्स में क्योंकि थी काम करी, तो दे डिडंट रियली have enough information, or you can say कि वो circumstances जो enabling environment आपको दें जहाँ आप information access कर सकें, whereas of course the people in schools and colleges were able to access, they had someone to look up to who was able to guide them. फिर हमने पूछा उनसे कि can prosecution service be more inclusive by conducting awareness and training sessions in law schools. The overwhelming majority of them were in favor of that. कि yes, that can work. If schools के अंदर आके awareness या training sessions हो, तो it is a career opportunity that can be explored by students from a very young age in terms of getting information about it, exploring it, figuring more about it, and then eventually you will have a pipeline of interested candidates as well if they feel more empowered or have more information. फिर हमने पूछा कि can prosecution service be more inclusive by introducing enabling structures like daycare, maternity leave, paternity leave, all of that. So of course female lawyers always be interested in some sort of support. लेकिन उसमें भी आप देखें 46% of the respondents who said that, which means that this is not a make or break situation for them. So enabling structures उतना बड़ा deterrent नहीं है जितना आप देखें information, lack of information है. So ये भी एक बड़ी interesting correlation थी कि it's not just कि वो हर वक्त बस आके demands ही करेंगी of structures and stuff. All they want is information and then awareness and training, and they will be willing to.
I think now that I look at it in hindsight, I think that's true. I think that even when I think about my time at law school and even now as a lawyer, when I think about it, I do think that I have come across nothing related to anybody joining the prosecution services or any law firms that explicitly state that they take criminal cases like that. And I think that's particularly true. Now that I think about it, now that I focus more on it, I think that's very true.
Yeah. So हमने फिर ये भी पूछा कि क्या outreach programs अगर prosecution खुद करे initiate, can that build an interest of applicants towards prosecution service? So 34% of them agreed that yes, an outreach program whereby they invite and they sort of give you an insight or exposure, whatever, that kind of openness might be something positive. So वो भी, it's not a very high number, but like a decent number of people think that kind of an outreach would also build एक जो ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट है या इंफॉर्मेशन डेफिसिट है उस चीज को वो केटर करेगा. सो लाइक इट्स वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, बट आई थिंक अगर आप लार्जली देखें तो सबसे ज्यादा बड़ा जो इसके अंदर मेन एक अगर हम थीम निकालें या क्रक्स निकाल लें, दैट comes down to lack of information. That's the biggest issue as far as prosecution is concerned, because देखिए बाकी काम तो वही है ना जो आपने मतलब करना है as a lawyer या criminal law practice कर रहे हो. So I think it's the information gap which is the biggest takeaway from this particular sector.
So Nida, firstly, thank you so much for that very detailed presentation. I think, again, one of the important reasons why we have these talks is to discuss those very niche topics when it comes to fair representation, jo hum nahi kar pate, or often because they're missed in a lot of these big conversations that we're having, especially when it comes to judicial appointments, especially when it comes to prosecution and law firms and everything that we have discussed in this series. And we really appreciated the feedback we got last time with all of the talks that we did have. Thank you so much for sharing your study with us yet again. We are looking forward to having feedback from a lot of our viewers, a lot of our listeners at Women in Law. You can definitely get the copy or get a cursory reading on Lawyer PK, and I believe it's going to be available on the Women in Law site as well. Is that right, Nida? Like, is that accessible to people there as well?
The reprinted copies have also arrived now, so I will start disseminating to all those who've left their postal addresses at our different points of contacts as well. So look out for your copies. You will soon be getting them.
So I would like to
appreciate any and all sorts of.
I would like to end this on a very brilliant note, and this is in light of the discussion that we had today, when I expressed my desire to take up on some of the criminal cases that I would want to as a lawyer. A man who was contesting for the elections, the bar elections, this is Punjab bar, he said to me, well, then you need to forget about being a woman. And I laughed because I had to. So these are just one of those things. I just had to throw it in there as one of those last minute lighthearted things that I usually tell a lot of the women and a lot of the females entering the profession, that it's really just about you and what you're passionate about. And I think it's so important to talk about these niche sort of areas. Again, not very niche. It's the prosecution. It's a huge area. It's just the fact that we don't exist there, which is really sad. But thank you so much, Nida, for your time. Thank you so much for having me to host you.
But I just want to add one thing. I mean, having said so, of course, I mean, it's not that. I mean, having looked at it holistically and everything, I must acknowledge that the women who are working as prosecutors, especially in the GBV court that was established, I have to mention Prosecutor Asiya Yasin's name here. They are exceptionally good. They're doing their work with utmost sincerity. So we do have phenomenal female lawyers who are prosecutors, who are working in this field and excelling as well. So it's not like कि खवातीन है ही नहीं या आती नहीं and all that. We have leading examples. Also, Barrister Jugnu Kazmi, she's also been appointed as a state prosecutor in Islamabad. She also is now, I think, handling NAP prosecution cases. So that's an even more specialized and technical field within prosecution. So we have good names of women who are, who have taken over this hard field and are making their mark felt and doing an amazing job. So I want to end on this note that it is a place where you can excel. You can definitely, you should consider it, and we'll be happy to support in whatever way we can.
Thank you so much for that, Nida. Thank you so much for mentioning the names, and I do think that they're doing fantastic work, and we would love to have them again on Women in Law to talk about their experiences and what they have felt like to be part of this hard, inverted commas, profession. Again, thank you so much, Nida. Thank you so much to all of our viewers. And that's it from us. Take care.
My pleasure. Take care. Hafiz.
Hafiz.